Hey, what's up guys, it's Thunderstruck115, and today I got what is going to be the first in what will likely be a longer series about a certain video game series known as Metroid. Now, I became a Metroid fan about a year and a half ago, although my first experience with the Metroid series was in 2018 when I first played Metroid on the NES via emulation. I didn't really get invested into it that much, and eventually I put the game down and forgot about it. Fast forward to 2020. Pandemic just started, so obviously I'm stuck at home. Well, actually no, I was actually stuck at my grandmother's house because my brother, he was abroad, and he had to come home and self-quarantine for 2 weeks, so me, my mom, and my sister went over to my grandmother's house for that 2 weeks. I had my Nintendo Switch with me, and during that time, I got introduced to Super Metroid via the Nintendo Switch Online service. I got absolutely hooked on the game, and I must have played it at least 24 times that summer. I would later go back and play the other 2D games in the series, with Fusion, Metroid Zero Mission, Metroid 2 Return of Samus, and AM2R. Additionally, I did also eventually pick up a copy of Metroid Prime on the GameCube and gave that a try. And over the past year and a half, the Metroid series has become one of my favorite video game franchises. And as a result, I really want to go back through each of these games and take a closer look in depth at them. At least the 2D games. I haven't done all the 3D games yet. I might choose to review them later, but at the moment, I'm planning on doing the 2D games in the series, because I come from the background of someone whose experience with the Metroid series is primarily rooted in the 2D installments. So today, we are going to begin with Metroid, released for the Nintendo Entertainment System back in 1986. I think it's safe to say that this game is probably one of the best games to be released on the Nintendo Entertainment System. But how well does it hold up, both as a part of the Metroid series and as a game overall? Well, most NES games at the time were really bright and colorful, but Metroid is very different because you boot up the game and it's very dark. The opening theme just conveys something sinister and ominous, but eventually it just breaks out into a small ray of hope. And I really think this is definitely one of the best intro screens for any NES game I've really ever played. And then, text appears explaining your mission. Emergency order. Defeat the Metroid of the planet Zebeth and destroy the Mother Brain, the mechanical life vein. Okay, now this is obviously just a poor translation from the Japanese version. This was pretty common back in the early NES days. I mean, you'd see something similar with, say, Zelda 1. To go in depth, in the far distant future, a group known as the Space Pirates have found a new life form on the planet SR-388, known as the Metroids. A parasitic life form that the Space Pirates are using beta rays to clone to use as a bioweapon and wreak havoc upon the galaxy. To stop this, the Galactic Federation sends a lone bounty hunter, Samus Aran, to stop the Space Pirates and defeat Mother Brain. So, she is sent to planet Zebes to do just that. So, you take control of Samus, and she starts feeling kind of weak, honestly. Now, the controls are pretty simple, and about what you'd expect for an NES game like this. Press A to jump, press B to shoot, use the D-pad to run around, select to swap between your beam and your missiles, and start to pause the game. Pretty simple, no way you can fuck that up. The game dumps you into this dark blue cavern, and there are 2 directions you can go, left or right. No matter which direction you decide to go, you'll learn something. if you choose to go to the left, you'll get the Morph Ball, which allows Samus to shrink into a ball about half of her normal height to allow her to go through small gaps. If you move over to the right, you'll notice the blue hatch. Shooting it will cause it to open for a couple of seconds. This will bring you into another room with another blue hatch. Going through there will take you into another large cavern. Eventually, though, you'll hit a wall with only a one-tiled gap allowing you to progress. Unfortunately, you won't be able to go through there without the Morph Ball, so instead you'll have to backtrack and go left to grab it. Which basically teaches the player that in order to progress in this game, they'll have to find certain upgrades. This is the crux of Metroid. The game is about exploration to find upgrades, to unlock new paths, to new upgrades and bosses to fight. Along the way, you'll find plenty of enemies. Some of these are these little tiny little crab things, and then there's also these weird spinny things that drop from the ceiling and then explode. Killing them will sometimes drop energy and later on missiles, or sometimes it won't drop anything at all. Eventually, you'll come to a vertical shaft, which you can climb up by jumping on these platforms. This might be a bit tricky because of the little crab things crawling on top of them. You'll eventually reach a door where you can go right, or you can continue climbing. Another one will lead to a room where there's an item locked behind a red hatch, and a third one which will lead you to this mysterious pit with two statues. These represent the two main bosses in the game, Crude and Ridley. You'll need to defeat both in order to create a path across this gap to get to Turian, which is the final area of the game where Mother Brain resides. I actually do like how the game conveys this to you in the actual game, but of course it only does so if you end up wandering here. Meanwhile, you don't have anything to open up the red hatches with, so you'll have to eventually backtrack and go to the path to the right. This will lead to another vertical shaft. And besides the fact that the colors are different, it looks the same as the previous one. There's different paths you can take. You can drop down and grab the missiles, or you can go straight across, grab an energy tank. Of course, once you grab the missiles, you can open up the red hatches by shooting them with missiles 5 times. Which I did not know on my first playthrough. Now, I mentioned earlier about how the game did a good job with conveyance in telling you that you needed to find Crude and Ridley in order to get to the final area. Well, unfortunately, basically everything else that it needs to convey, it doesn't really do very well. Now, when I got the missiles, I thought, okay, maybe I can open up the red doors now. So I went over, found a red door somewhere to the right a bit. It wasn't the one I found in the shaft earlier, and I shot it with a missile, and it didn't open. So I thought, okay, I probably need something else. So then I ended up going to Norfair, and went to the left, hit a dead end, went to the right, hit a vertical shaft, tried going up, but I couldn't get onto a certain platform because I didn't have the high jump boots. So I decided to go down. There's another hatch, open it, go left, hit another dead end. I have no idea where the hell I'm supposed to go or what I'm supposed to do. See, here's the thing. In order to open the red hatches, you have to shoot it with 5 missiles, which is something the game just doesn't do a good job of telling you. Because I thought that missiles were needed to open the hatches. But the thing is, I only shot it with 1. But I didn't get any feedback at all that that's what I was supposed to keep doing. If they made it so that the hatch just flashed briefly but didn't quite open, then maybe I get the idea of, okay, maybe I need to hit it a few more times with the missiles. It wasn't until I played Super Metroid where it did flash when I hit the red hatches with the missiles that I learned that, oh, okay, let me try that in Metroid NES. And sure enough, it opened, and I found the Morph Ball bombs and the long beam. And I will say, something that this game does well is make it exciting to get new upgrades. After being stuck with just an absolute pea shooter that can only shoot like 5 feet in front of Samus, being able to shoot across the entire screen felt so good. And getting the Morph Bombs allows me to kill enemies that are only 1 tile high. Now that I mention it, I'm want to talk about the controls of just a bit more. So I mentioned just the basic controls earlier, but I need to talk about how Samus feels, if that makes any sense. Now, most of the Metroid games allow you to shoot in 8 directions. Metroid NES, on the other hand, only allows you to shoot in 3. And while in future games, Nintendo had the benefit of hindsight, this is something I still noticed immediately, even before I played any other Metroid. A lot of enemies in this game are only 1 tile high, but since Samus is 2 tiles tall, and since her blaster is on the 2nd tile, it means that if an 1 tile tall enemy is standing on the same level that Samus is, she won't be able to shoot them. Future games allow Samus to duck and shoot so she can hit enemies on the floor, but this game doesn't. Now, that might not be a big deal if I could jump up into the air and then shoot downwards while in midair, but the game doesn't let you do that either, even though it lets you shoot up while in midair. This just makes this game feel a lot more dated compared to other Metroid games. Anyways, little rant aside, let's get back. So once you get the Morph Ball bombs, the game really opens up. Something that Metroid does really well is letting the player progress in any way they want. Well, maybe not any way you want. There are still a few required items, like you do need the Morph Ball bombs, you do need the Morph Ball, and you do need the first missile tank. But it doesn't forcefully guide you down a linear path. It lets you choose how you want to progress. For example, once you grab the Morph Ball, you can go to Norfair and grab a whole bunch of other upgrades. Or you can choose to get the Ice Beam first in Brinstar. While you're in Norfair, you can go and get the High Jump Boots, which allows you to get the Varia Suit, which gives you added protection, as well as almost completely negating damage from lava/acid. Do you decide to go up there, or do you continue to press forward into Norfair and continue to get more upgrades like the Screw Attack, or the Wave Beam? If you do decide to get the Varia Suit, you head back into Norfair with the added protection, or you go to Kraid's Lair. The game gives you a lot of options, and I do like that. But there is a lot of backtracking, and something that's probably becoming apparent by now is how similar a lot of the areas look. Like, obviously, like, each different area looks distinct. Like, Brinstar looks different from Norfair, and they both look different from Kraid's Lair, and all of them look different from Ridley's Lair. But, like, each location within the major areas looks very similar. Like, each vertical shaft in Norfair looks almost identical. The 2 big orange shafts look identical in Brinstar. A lot of the tunnels look the same. As such, navigating Zebes can often be very confusing, especially because this game does not have an in-game map. Now, Super Metroid Onwards would include an in-game map, and it wasn't particularly detailed. I mean, it just showed the general layouts of all the rooms. But even something as simple as that helps you keep track of where you are, and more importantly, where you need to go. Since Metroid 1 doesn't have that, it leaves it either to memory, to you making your own map, or saying fuck it and looking up a guide. And there is no bigger example of this than Kraid's Lair. My god, navigating this place was an absolute nightmare. The rooms look even more samey here than they did in Norfair or Brinstar. And it doesn't help that there's a bunch of enemies that can just pop out of nowhere and just kamikaze into you. And when you factor in all the times that you have to respawn, it just makes navigating an absolute pain in the ass. I really think that a map screen would really help, but unfortunately it just holds this game back a bit. In terms of combat, most of the enemies are fairly simple, and they don't really seem to get tough until Ridley's Lair. But by then, you'll probably have the Screw Attack, which instantly kills most enemies anyways by spin jumping into them, although for whatever reason, it deactivates just a bit earlier than I would like, which can be kind of annoying when you're in these tight corridors and there's not much room to jump. But whatever. Now, as I mentioned, you start off with a really weak beam that only travels for like a few tiles before it disappears, but when you get the long beam, that fixes. There are also 2 more beam upgrades. There's the Ice Beam, which allows you to freeze enemies in place, but the caveat with that is when an enemy is frozen by the beam, they don't take any damage, and therefore you have to shoot them again while they're frozen to actually do any damage. But doing so will also unfreeze the enemy, so essentially it takes twice as many shots to actually freeze enemies. But you can also use it to freeze enemies such as Rippers, which ordinarily are invulnerable to your beams. This can also be done to make impromptu platforms, so you can reach other areas. Then there's the Wave Beam. This doubles the damage of your basic beam and also causes it to arc in a sine wave. This means that you can actually use this to shoot enemies on the floor that are only 1 tile high. Now, the Long Beam, Wave Beam, and Ice Beam are all great upgrades. This would be expanded in the future, but I think this is a pretty good start. But unfortunately, there's a slight issue. The Ice Beam and the Wave Beam do not stack. Now, Super Metroid would make it so that multiple beam types can stack on top of each other, but unfortunately in Metroid 1, this is not the case. If you have the Ice Beam, but then you decide to grab the Wave Beam, you will get the Wave Beam, but you'll lose the Ice Beam. And the only way to get it back is to backtrack all the way to Brinstar and grab it from the Chozo statue. Doing so will cause you to lose the Wave Beam. Now, I understand that maybe the NES had some technical limitations that prevented the Ice Beam and the Wave Beam from stacking, or maybe there was some game design reason that I'm not aware of. I'm fine with the beams not stacking, but what I'm not fine with is the fact that switching between them is so freaking tedious. Like, if they just had an option to change which beam was active in the pause menu, kind of like Zelda 1 did with item switching, I'd be fine. And the reason for that is because in most situations, I like the Wave Beam. It's nice to be able to absolutely shred through most enemies. The double damage is useful, being able to shoot through walls is extremely useful. However, the Ice Beam makes the fights against Kraid and Ridley a whole lot easier, and it is necessary to defeat the Metroids in Torium. You can't defeat them with the Wave Beam. So because of that, and the fact that the Wave Beam is just in some very out-of-the-way part of Lower Norfair, I just don't often go for the Wave Beam at all. Instead, just grab the Ice Beam and roll with that the entire game. Damn shame, too. And since I can't really think of any better time to do so, let's go ahead and discuss the bosses. So there are 3 main bosses. Ridley in this game is probably one of, if not the easiest boss fight in the whole Metroid series. Now, all these bosses are basically just missile sponges, which for an NES game is pretty much fine, honestly. But Ridley, he just hops there, he spews fireballs constantly in the same arcing pattern every single time. I apparently read somewhere that the arc is decided during the time that you boot up the game, but once the predetermined arc is chosen, it will never deviate from that. So if you can just identify a spot where it's not going to hit, you'll be completely safe. Or better yet, just freeze the fireball, stand on top of them, and just waylay into Ridley with your missiles. You can also use your beam if you run out, though. Kraid is a bit tougher because of the more erratic projectile spam. He shoots 3 spikes horizontally on his platform, as well as 2 little boomerang things in an arcing wave. The trick here is to wait for him to shoot the middle horizontal spike, freeze it in midair, and then pummel him with missiles. But if you freeze it while it's still attached to his body, you'll just be stuck to him and you won't be able to hit him with missiles. As such, Kraid is actually a much tougher challenge than Ridley is, but once you get his pattern down, and if you have enough energy tanks, it's really not that difficult either. And, of course, the final boss, Mother Brain, is probably the most challenging because of how overwhelming it can be. Funnily enough, Mother Brain doesn't attack you directly, but instead relies on ceiling turrets and these little ring things called Rinkus to protect you. 3 of them will appear on the screen at any one time, and when they spawn, they'll spawn and fly in a straight line towards wherever Samus was when it first spawned in. Which means you gotta keep moving. There's a trick here where you can freeze the Rinkas, and if you freeze all 3 of them, none of them will spawn because of the sprite limit of the NES, allowing you to spam a few missiles into Mother Brain without being hurt. Of course, if you fall into this little acid pit, you're going to have a bit of a tough time to get out. I found that if you can jump just onto the very edge of the platform where Mother Brain is, and then jump onto the right over here, that's generally the way to do it. So yeah, I'd say Mother Brain is a pretty good final boss, but Kraid and Ridley are just very easy. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of NES games at the time were brutally difficult, and I'd much rather take the easy game that is Metroid over something like, say, Ninja Gaiden, but I do think just a bit more challenge would have been nice. So yeah, overall, I'd say Metroid is a pretty decent game so far. But there is one thing that really brings it down. Well, 2, but one in particular. So, at the beginning of the game, Samus spawns in with 30 energy. But by killing enemies, you can get this to a maximum of 99. Considering that the enemies in the first areas of the game aren't that tough to kill, I'd say this works pretty well. Here's the problem, though. If you die, or if you have to leave the game and come back later using the password system, then you also spawn with 30 energy, regardless of the amount of energy tanks you've collected. Now, as I said, Metroid NES has a password system because at the time, the cartridges did not come standard with save batteries. So I get this was part of the times. However, only spawning in with 30 energy is brutal, especially when you get to later areas like Kraid's lair and Ridley's lair, where the enemies do a butt-fuck ton of damage whenever they touch you. So, you're gonna need to get more health. Now, future games in the series would have recharge stations, which would instantly fill your energy and missiles back up to their max capacity. Metroid NES doesn't have that. So there's only 2 ways to max out your energy. The first is to find an energy tank expansion. There's only 8 of these in the game, and only 6 of them will actually raise your max energy, and once you pick them up, they're gone, you can't grab them again. The only other way is to slowly, tediously kill enemies over and over so that they drop energy and missile pickups that you can grab. I remember, when I was first playing this game, I remember being stuck in Kraid's lair. I kept dying, so I figured, alright, I'll find this one shaft area and just start killing enemies over and over. And at the time, I only had 3 extra energy tanks, and it took me 20 minutes to fill up 3 extra energy tanks. 20 minutes! And it's not even that it's hard, because it's really not. On the contrary, it is so mind-numbingly easy, and it is so boring. Like, honestly, issues like the lack of conveyance, the lack of a map, and the inability to stack different beams just seem trivial compared to this. Because, again, those later areas require you to have a lot of energy. And unless you can beat the game in one sitting without dying, you are going to have to farm at some point, and it takes forever. Now, I've actually played this game often enough that I've gotten so good that I can beat this game without dying, without having to respawn, which means I can just not have to farm and just keep going through the game, la-di-da. And it is a lot more fun when you don't have to tediously grind out pickups. The problem is, I only got to that level after playing this game several times. And as such, my opinions of it were just way freaking lower. And I am sure that 99.99% of newcomers are going to have to farm. And by the way, this is every single time that you die or restart from a password. Honestly, if there was one change that I could make to this game, it would be to add recharge stations, because that would just make it so much easier. Because the thing is, there's nothing stopping you from getting all your health back except your time and patience. So yeah, that sucks. Though, I will say, in Ridley's lair and in Kraid's lair, before each boss, you are given a convenient enemy spawn that will allow you to grind a bit faster, but it can only help it so much. In Torian, there are the Metroids. These guys will latch onto you and suck all your energy. The only way to get them off is to go into Morph Ball mode and start laying bombs to dislodge it. It's difficult at first, but once you get a feel for the rhythm that you need, it's actually quite easy. Freeze them with the ice beam and then shoot them with 5 missiles to kill them. Now, these guys tend to drop pickups more often than most enemies, and when they do, it's either 30 energy or 30 missiles, which makes this an easy way to restock on supplies before the final boss, especially considering how many Metroids there are. Honestly, dealing with them isn't really all that difficult once you got a feel for how they move, because once you freeze them, they stay frozen for quite a bit. And if you're full on supplies and you don't feel like killing them, you don't have to. You can just freeze them and run past. Once you defeat Mother Brain, a time bomb will be set and you have to get out fast. You're given a vertical shaft you gotta climb up. All the platforms are very narrow, which has a bit of platforming challenge, but it's not too difficult. Get up to the top, ride the elevator up, and you win. So yeah, that was Metroid 1. Overall, I'd say it's a decent game, but it is dated in so many areas. The lack of the map screen, the inability to stack beam types, the poor conveyance, and, of course, the constant need for farming really bring this game down. As such, I'd much rather play any other 2D Metroid game because they're just a lot more fun. Even Metroid 2, which I'll talk about more when I review that game. So, would I recommend this game? If you're a fan of the Metroid series and want to see where it got its start, then I'd say it's worth checking out. But if you've never played a Metroid game before and are looking for somewhere to get into the series, I'd stay clear of this one for now. You're gonna get a much better experience starting with something like Super Metroid, Zero Mission, or Fusion. But yeah, anyways, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for more, and tell me what you think of Metroid NES. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, that's it. Peace!